Hello. Welcome to a continuing series of interviews with candidates for the Montana legislature, which will commence in 2009 in Helena. This presentation is brought to you by Bresnan Communications, the Montana Telecommunications Association, and your local public access channel, MCAT, here in Missoula. My name is Mark Staples, and I'm the moderator of these and the questionnaire. And my guest this afternoon is when we're taping in the afternoon, hoping to represent House District 97, as she is the incumbent, is Michelle Reinhardt. Michelle, thank you for coming and
thanks, Mark,
taking the time to join us. Her opponent, the Republican nominee, Michelle is the Democrat. Her Republican opponent, Carol Minjares, was invited and could not join us. So we'll have a little chat. And to start out, I'd like you to take the opportunity to introduce yourself to Missoulians who may not know you, your background, your personal background, your professional background, and just let them get to know you a little bit before we get into the policy questions.
Sure. Thanks, Mark, and thank you to the folks of House District 97 who sent me to Helena for my first session in 2007, and that was one heck of a session. But I hit the ground running, and I told you I would work hard for you, and I did. I passed 7 bills this last session, and only one other newly elected member, Bill McChesney, passed more bills. And so I'd like to go back and continue to keep working hard for you. But let me tell you a little bit more about my background. I grew up in Livingston, Montana. My folks and my grandparents were both Bobcats, so I decided to come to Missoula and be a Grizz instead. I went to Carroll College, and I was doing an internship in 2001 at the legislature, and that's how I got sucked into the political process. And I realized that there weren't very many young people, and there weren't very many young women. So in 2007, Actually, in 2006, I decided to run and shake up the Good Old Boy Network, and I'm currently the youngest woman in the Montana legislature. It's been an honor, it's been challenging, but I do enjoy working with people of all walks of life and all backgrounds to find common ground. I was on the Business and Labor Committee last time, and Health and Human Services, and I am on the Economic Affairs Interim Committee now. My background is in conservation, family agriculture, and in protecting what we love about living in Montana.
Michelle, I'm sure you're finding this as you go to, as they call, when these candidates go door to door, their parlance when they talk to each other is they're on the doors. And when you're on the doors, I suspect you're hearing a lot about the economy, the national economy, and concerns, and yet the newspapers in Montana say not completely not to worry, but that we're actually doing fairly well. We didn't make those kinds of loans. We don't have those kinds of institutions. What's your, as an incumbent legislator and somebody you hope to go back, what's your assessment of the current Montana economy? And is there something that you would like to do either to keep it stabilized? Is there something you've done right? Is there something we need to do to give it more vibrancy if you get to Helena?
Thanks for the question, Mark. There is a lot of work to do. We have come a long way with the economy. Some folks, as I go door to door and talk to people, some folks are doing really well and others are really hurting. The average wage in Missoula is $30,000 a year. Some folks are doing okay, but for the paycheck, it's just not stretching as far as it used to. And it doesn't help that the price of groceries and the price of gas keeps going up as wages aren't. The Schweitzer administration and the bills that we passed last session have done a lot to encourage job force training, to encourage research and development at our universities, which can translate into good paying jobs which keep Montanans in Montana. We have good things happening with value-added agriculture and with protecting our great places to hunt and fish, which generate millions of dollars in tourism revenue each year. We do have a lot more to do, and we are seeing some impacts from the national economy in terms of hits on folks losing their homes, in terms of it being harder to get money for student loans. People who are about to retire are very concerned about their funds in the stock market, as they should be, and I think it will result in less revenue for state and local services with the coming budget year.
Well, speaking of the coming budget year, I as you know, I live in Helena most of the time, and the Revenue and Transportation Interim Committee met this week, and the projection at this point for a surplus going into the January session is somewhere between 300 and 400 million. Now, granted, that could change overnight if oil keeps falling, gas keeps falling, commodity prices. It's interesting, by the way, so the Montana consumer is bedeviled by the fact that gas prices rose, that natural gas prices rose, and that food prices rose. Yet, our ag base, our oil production, and our natural gas, and then the taxes they pay, all benefited. The surplus of the state of Montana grew, while the consumers sort of somehow pay that tab a little bit. So it's a balancing act. My question is, if we do have a $300 or $400 million surplus, and we're fortunate enough to have that going into the session, do you have any priorities for it? Save it, invest it, return it, spend it? If you were in charge, and you will be as a legislator, what are your priorities for that?
Well, Mark, should I go back to Helena in 2007 or in 2009? We learned some lessons from the 2007 session, and that included living within our means. We have a constitutional obligation to have a balanced budget. We did send a lot of dollars back to the taxpayer, including $400 for every homeowner. What we need to do is cover basic public services that we all depend on. The biggest chunk of state service dollars goes to pay for education, Health and Human Services, and the Department of Corrections. If we invest in education and if we invest in mental health services in our communities, then we can save money by preventing folks from ending up in the correction system, and then we can cut dollars on corrections. One other area where we must invest is in the green economy and in green collar jobs if we want to compete globally. We have great sun and great wind in Montana. I grew up in Livingston. I know we have good wind, and we need to be leaders. We can train our high school students and our college students to install solar panels and to weatherize our homes, our institutions, and our businesses. That will save all of us money on our power bills, and right now we are paying 20% higher rates than the rest of the region, and that's wrong. So let's invest in our green economy, and let's invest in getting off of oil. And most people want to do that and do it now. The other areas are if we invest in research and development at our universities, that will translate into good paying jobs for Montanans.
With investments come expenses, and we need to, you don't invest without money to invest. One of the investments that is being called for very dramatically, and actually in court, is more of an investment, more funding for our public schools. We both know that the governor feels, and the Democratic Party under his leadership has said, they've done what they thought they could afford to do in the last sessions. They're trying to catch up for previous years, they say, but you know, they have to operate within the budget as it is, and they argue that while it isn't everything they'd want to do, it's sufficient, and they'll improve it as they can. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit in Helena say, you know, it is not enough, it's not nearly enough, and we need to fund it more. And the figure that's thrown out there, and I think this would be the top end, was that it might be as much, what really would be required is as much as $600 million more per year in funding. Now, as you correctly stated, it's already a major part of the budget. If, in fact, the court orders that we spend more, or it's just a consensus of Montanans and particularly the legislators that we spend more on schools, I just ask the same question of everyone. Simply this: where do we get the money? And that's not a challenge. What that seems to be the question both at the national and the state level now. If we have programs that need to be funded, where do we get the money?
Sure. Mark, it's a tough question. But first, I'd like to say that public education is very important. And I know there are some folks out there who do not believe in public education or in public services in general. Public education is the great equalizer for people to be able to get the resources they need in order to pursue the American dream and the freedoms that we have, in order to be their best and develop their skills and talents and be contributing members to our society. Yes, we do have some funding challenges. We increased school funding by 27 to 32% last session, but we do have more to do. It used to be back in the day, back even in the 80s, the state's share of education funding was about 70%. In the 1988 Office of Public Instruction debate, Nancy Keenan and her Republican opponent were arguing about whether or not the state's share of education should be 80% or 85%. Today, the state's contribution is between 40 and 60%, depending on the school district. Right now, about $500 million comes from the state, and $800 million for public schools for K through 12 comes from property taxpayers. If the state is able to increase its share, that can result in a net decrease in local property taxes, and that would be a good thing. In terms of the question, where should the dollars from education come from? Again, if we can invest in mental health services and in treatment programs that work, we can cut money from corrections and invest that in schools. If we're able to make savings and to generate revenue from research and development dollars, or from the coal tax trust fund interest, from the school trust, from these different sources of revenue, from dollars we've saved that didn't go to forest fires this last fire season, we can invest that money in schools. The fact is we have a declining number of students, and so we're going to have to not rely so heavily on tying funding to student enrollment. And we need to look at other ways to adjust the funding formula. One way to do it is to fund schools instead of districts. And that could allow for the consolidation of districts and administration and get more money back into the classroom.
Well, thank you. Taxes are always a question. I know the current governor, Brian Schweitzer, and also the Democratic nominee for governor, says he won't support any new taxes, and the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Roy Brown, says he won't support any new taxes. So assuming that they have the veto power, it sounds like we're not going to get any new taxes. In the meantime, however, the cities, the state, including your mayor, John Engen, maintain that they're not getting all the benefits of the state's recent surpluses, and that the city's obligations for law enforcement, for services, for all kinds of obligations have increased, and yet their funding sources are very limited and capped. And what they've asked for and what they're bringing to the legislature is a proposal to put before the voters in Missoula and other communities local option sales taxes. Normally, by the time most things get exempted, groceries and medicines, it really focuses on what are called luxury items. Some people certainly don't agree, but meals, prepared meals in restaurants, alcohol by the drink, lodging, and any recreational, for instance, river rafting, fishing, you name it. And right now, resorts, communities that have a resort designation, Whitefish, West Yellowstone, that are heavily dependent on tourists and have a large traffic of tourists, have that authority to take to their voters. And some of the voters have passed and some have turned it down. Now the proposal is to let every community in Montana take to their voters whether they want to have a local sales tax. And what are your thoughts on that? You'll be asked to vote on it if you're elected.
In general, I'm not a huge fan of a sales tax because it can be regressive, meaning that those who have the least amount of income would pay a biggest percentage of their income in a sales tax. However, if it is targeted and it exempts basic necessities, including groceries and medicine, then it could be a way to get increased revenue from all of the tourists passing through our state. And the communities that have this local options tax, including Whitefish and Big Sky, have been able to do a lot for their local services, including paving of roads and installing sidewalks and having law enforcement. Our revenues aren't keeping up with the needs for public service, and it's very expensive, as we know, to pay for these services through our property tax dollars. Again, the devil is in the details, and we need to make sure that this is a decision that we enable local voters to decide if that's what they want to do, and whether or not it would be a net reduction in their taxes overall. If we can show that that is the case, then it's something that I would support. But again, I want more information and more research to make a very thoughtful and informed decision on this issue. I do think we need to live within our means, run government well, and deliver efficient public services that we all rely on.
You know, we've talked about some overarching economic issues, and I've chosen those just as something that you can discuss whatever's on your mind underneath. But I know closer to your heart are probably some very specific issues we haven't talked about, and something that you might have in your briefcase to take to Helena if you're elected, and things you want to concentrate on, particularly now that you've been there one session and know your way around a little bit. Do you have such issues? And I'll ask you to weave them into a close to the voters of your district, and tell us what you would hope to take to Helena in the 2009 session, accomplish specifically, and then make a close to the voters. And I thank you for coming, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Mark. We have a lot of work to do, and we have big challenges ahead. The areas that I would really like to work on include healthcare, the economy, and conservation. My mom was a licensed clinical social worker in mental health. She still is to this day. I think if we can get folks the help they need in their communities, they're likely to do very well, and we can keep them out of the correction system. So we need to really help in that area with health and human services, and it saves all of us money in the long run. In terms of healthcare, medical expenses are the #1 reason why people go bankrupt. I remember going door to door and talking to a woman whose husband died of cancer, and his medical bills bankrupt them and they lost their home. There are too many stories out there like that. We can do things to help businesses and individuals with healthcare expenses. The Children's Health Insurance Initiative is a good step in the right direction to cover kids. Insure Montana helps small businesses with the rising cost of healthcare with subsidizing premiums and with tax credits. So we can look at these areas and how we can get consumers good information to make good decisions on healthcare. Ultimately, this will be a federal issue that we all need to work together to push our federal government and the insurance companies to do the right thing. On energy, we have a lot of work to do there to make research and development and investments in green-collar jobs and in job force training. That will go a long way to make Montana competitive. And then on conservation, my background is in land use planning. We need to encourage good design that protects our land, our water, our open spaces, our wildlife habitat, and our family farms and ranches. We can do better so we can protect what we love about living here, and that we can deal with things like extreme forest fire dangers. So think about what you want to save, where you want growth to go, and how to balance what we love about living here with private property rights. Thank you again for the opportunity to serve you. Please contact me if you have questions or concerns. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and I'd like to thank all the candidates that have graced us with taking time out of their day to come and share their thoughts about governance in Montana and their candidacies. And I want to encourage you not only to utilize and take advantage of one of your greatest privileges, but also out of honor for the services that these people offer us and the time they take to offer those services, to please go and vote in November. Thanks again to you for watching. Bresnan thanks you. The Montana Cable Telecommunications Association thanks you, and I thank you.